Welcome. Hi. Today at Coaching with Mendy, we have a beautiful guest. It's Eli Weinreb. Working as an LCSW. I think you do privately. You're working in a clinic, a supervisor in a clinic, worked in many clinics before. And we are in touch already for some time. And we just met recently at the Neshama conference. It was beautiful. And I would like to first, ask you some personal questions, if that's okay, and then we can go into about your work. And I know you specific work in the Jewish community, which is beautiful. And where do you work out of Jersey, I think?
So I currently am working out of Jersey mainly, but I'm also in New York.
New York. And you do obviously on Zoom as well, I assume.
Yeah, so a little bit
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Zoom, although therapy is always best in person, of course.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, by
Yeah.
all means. Good, good. So first of all, what got you into therapy? What's
Yeah, so what got me into therapy was growing up. I grew up in Borough Park, and growing up in Borough Park, seeing how there was again, it definitely changed a lot over time. But as I was growing up, there was a very strong black and white mindset where I knew a lot of really, really incredibly good-hearted people who, because they weren't exactly in the line of what the typical bar parker was, it was like either you can fit in exactly the way it was or there's no place for you. And I saw a lot of guys go off the derech and really struggle. And they weren't like bad kids. They were really just struggling. And it was something that I saw, and I was always like, I wish I can help people find that medium. So that's what got me into it initially.
I assume that that's also got you. And I think you were also volunteering at the Our Place.
Yeah. So I'll tell you is when I was
I,
growing
I
up, I
used I
always
used to step in there as well. I don't know if you saw me, but I used to come in there as well.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I was only there for a few years, but I wanted to work at 1225. I don't know if you remember what that was. That was in Bar
I know
Park.
that. I know the living room and the
Yes.
two different.
So 1225 it was by Babad. He's
Uh-huh.
actually in Tom's River now.
I'm th I'm 39th Street.
Correct.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I always exactly. So I always wanted to volunteer there, and it never worked out. So then finally, when our place, when it was an opportunity, I said, "There's never going to be the right time, so let me do that now," and I did
Wow.
it.
So I just saw that on your bio lately, and what you're saying, that's obviously something attracted me to us together because this is something that I myself was doing many years just um, before I even came into the into the therapy line, into the coaching line, whatever. I'm doing somatic work. When I had a business, I used to take these teens off the streets and come into work to me.
Right.
And I also affiliated with Avi Fisher Falat, and that's Randall Sonny and all of that. So
Mhm.
that's beautiful. So when you're seeing so that basically spoke to you. Seeing not everybody fits in, not everybody has the same box or fits into the same box, and not everybody's meant to be in a box. So
Correct.
right. So well, I would like to hear more. So tell me more about that. That is an important topic,
Yeah.
and like I know we want to talk about OCD, but that's a very important topic because I've seen this already for I would say 20 or 30 years already,
Yeah.
and you mentioned of the derech. That means going away from the way you were brought up.
Hmm.
Let's hear more about that and what got you into that and how you see that because that's something which I definitely connect to a lot. And I feel even today it changed a little bit, but there's still people you won't even recognize that they are different because they're still going the same way and looking the same way, but they don't want to be that way, or they're not. If for somehow it's not resonating with them.
Yeah. I actually just had this conversation with somebody a week ago where I was talking about it is a very tough medium where as a community you want to be accepting of everybody in every way and just have everybody do whatever they want, but then there's also the concept of the structure and the just everybody getting going along in the same. I would say if you don't have a sense of structure, it would turn into chaos. So again, it is really hard to have that balance, which again I think it really I think that with religion, I think a lot of people that go off don't realize that there's so many different flavors to religion, right? You know, to Yiddishkeit, there's so many different levels. A great thing I heard from a Rebbe of mine was he said, Judaism, religion is like it's like a club, it's like a golf club. You know, you have to know somebody to get in. You can't just get in. And then once you're in the club, you really want to do everything that you can to stay in the club. You know, the only reason you would leave a club is if somebody's giving you bad vibes, if you're not getting along with people. Somebody has to rock the boat, right? I mean, Yiddishkeit, you have the community concept, which you have nowhere else. I mean, you have this, you move into any from community anywhere, and you have shul is such a gift, right? You don't know anybody in the community, and every Shabbos, every day, but every Shabbos especially, the whole community gets together, and you get to meet everybody in the community. Everybody's so open. Shabbos meals, everybody invites you. I mean, no matter how firm you are, people invite you everywhere. We have Hatzalah. We have. I always say I heard this guy saying how he got a boat and he ran a fundraiser, and he put together $50,000, and after paying up all the bills, he walked away with 30K. And I'm like thinking how in the firm world, somebody posts that somebody passes away. Within 20 minutes, you raise $1 million on a GoFundMe without doing anything. There's so much beauty in Yiddishkeit that, again, I think that when somebody is turned off by Yiddishkeit, unfortunately, it has to do with a lot of the way they're being, something has to rock the boat. It's the way that they were given it over, and not having that ability to see things from a broader perspective, to be able to understand that it's not necessarily Yiddishkeit, it's not necessarily Judaism, but rather a bad experience that somebody went through.
Yeah, like you said, the way it was given over, the delivery, it's the packaging, how it was packaged, and that's really what matters. And it's so hard to see and the pain. But at that time, um, if there's no judgment and you just let it be, then then the shine and again, not everybody's supposed to be fitting in to your box. You can fit into another box, and yeah. So that's something. So how that got you into therapy? You want to like expand a little
Yeah,
bit on that?
yeah. So absolutely. So you're saying how nobody should fit into a box. So as a therapist, I do specialize in specific modalities, and I would say I use three specific modalities, which is CBT, DBT, and IFS. But I've trained in about 10 different modalities. And again, to say exactly what you said, to echo what you're saying, is that I really believe that we're not supposed to take somebody and put them into a box. And when you see somebody who only focuses on one specific modality, I feel like we can be taking the client and really putting them into our box. And what we really want to do is we want to help them outside that box. So being able to sort of see that, take things from that lens and be able to really just move forward is really being able to allow, using different modalities. And then if I'm using one thing and a client doesn't connect to it, it's really being able to adjust to that and really give the space for each person for them to go through their journey, and no judgment, and take it with whatever they're connecting to.
What ages would you say? I know you're working with teens and adults, but I'm just saying, as far as going back to the um, OTD, let's call it. That's just I don't like labels and I don't like letters, but I always say, even in clinical, it's only meant for one therapist to the next therapist. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about the like red milk or the blue milk? Which milk are we talking about? That's they're both milk and they're both, but you know, I hate to call it by that name, but it's just a matter of it's their path. What do you see like these days today as far as ages or happening, or is it still happening? Are you still dealing with that? Is it because I've seen a change in ages. That's what I was wondering. What's your experience?
I think that there's definitely a greater sense of autonomy at a younger age now than it was, I would say, in that concept. Meaning, I've worked with kids as young as 11 years old that were, going and doing really intense behavioral issues, stealing cars, breaking into, stealing stuff from stores, breaking into cars, smoking and everything from young ages where they're just really trying to connect. So I don't think it's necessarily in a specific age. I think that there is a sense of like the whole world is, the younger kids are looked at as older, these days than back in the day where I feel like, everybody has a car younger, everybody has a
There's
phone.
more information out.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also I think that we're really treating our younger kids much more like adults these days than we were back in the day.
Well, according to your experience, what you've experienced working with this, what would you say should be done different and where? Is it at home? Is it at the school system? Is it is it the community? Do you see more, like say you mentioned Borough Park? Isn't that happening in, I don't know, different communities around? What's the, like 5 towns of Rockaway or different parts in Jersey or in California?
I mean, I would say it's in every community. Every community has the people who are struggling. I would say it really starts at home. Um, there's a lot that has to do with, chinuch and the school systems where, when we send our kids off to school, they wake up at let's say 7 o'clock. By 8:30, they're out of the house. They're not home till an hour or two before they go to bed. So it really has to do a lot with the schooling. But I would say the core years is where it really counts, which is, I would say growing up until a kid is, I would say around 11 years old. We're not really teaching our kids. I would say we want to teach them values rather than, right, rather than telling them fear things and do things because you get punished. We want to teach them values, what's right from wrong. And I would say till 11 years old, kids are very, very, they're very, what's the word I'm looking for? They're very impressionable with your parents, and then it becomes the whole focus from kids shifts more to their friends, and they're not really talking to their parents as much as they get older than that. So I would say it really, we're living in a world, and I think that this could play a role in as well. Play a role in it as well, is that we live in a world where the whole cost of living and the anxiety of living really went so much higher. I mean, uh, typical family in the frum world right now, to be able to raise a family of three, you have to be making close to $200,000 a year just to cut even. So I definitely think that stress and along with everything else and having the family and trying to balance everything definitely spills over to the kids. It can spill over to the kids. I think it's important to let kids be kids. I was talking to somebody who said, those houses where you walk into and it's immaculate, it's perfectly clean, and they have a bunch of little kids, and you question, are these kids able to be kids in this house? Right? People are almost so worried about what the neighbors are going to think when they walk into the house. I always say I love when I walk into my house and I see my dining room table is covered with arts and crafts, because that means my kids are actually doing things, they're enjoying. So I really think it's about really focusing on living for yourself, living for your kids, and really, I love this line that I always say is you either work to live or you live to work. And it's really important to make sure that we're working to live.
Working for them. Would you say that in other religions this problem is also existing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's no question that again, in every religion, there's going to be extreme people, and there's going to be people who don't align with that. I also think that when, let's say, look at the frum community for a second, when you have people who are Bali Tshuva and people who are Gerim, I feel like they found something that you and I strive for on a day-to-day basis, the connection, right? And when you have that strong connection, you could see it a lot with like, really from people where they have such a strong connection, but then their kids are growing up and they don't have necessarily that strong connection, where they have a really hard time understanding and relating to their parents as well as the other way around, which then leads them to start to look around and question things. So I wouldn't say it's just in the frum community. I think that at the end of the day, no matter what religion you're going to have, if there's an extreme and a lack of, I mean, what's coming to my mind is the four parenting styles, right? The four parenting styles.
Will tell
There's
us about it.
Yeah, so there's the authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and neglectful, right? So the neglectful is pretty obvious, where you just, neglect your kids, where you don't know where they are, what they're doing. Permissive is a lot of times where people who grow up with authoritarian parents who are just, you do what I say because I said so. So then they try to give their kids the exact opposite. and they let their kids just do whatever they want, and it becomes the permissive parents, which again is really not healthy in the long run. And then there's so again, that's the authoritarian, where it's just you do what I said. And the last one is authoritative, which is I'm the parent, I make the rules, and at the same time, I'm going to help you grow up and gain a sense of autonomy, gain a sense of independence. So I think that if we as parents can do that, if we can find that balance, and we can, whether it's in the frum world, in the Yiddish world, or outside the frum world, in any religion, I think if we can help our kids explore, inside the boundaries, or inside the whatever you want to call it, inside the religion, I think it'll give that healthy balance and help them not necessarily stray away.
Right. So what I'm hearing is, and that's why it's probably that I would say 75% supposed to be coming from the parents, and maybe 25% should be coming from the school system, um, which we have to, I don't think every parent notices that. The other thing is, there's no parenting classes. Like sometimes people get married, have children, they have no clue, how to go about it.
Right.
So it's important that parents should know that the child is not supposed to be like you, and the child is not supposed to be like the brother or the sister, or like your cousins, and give them the autonomy of being who they are.
Yeah.
So what's happening is, which I'm seeing, and I always tell, I have sometimes, I work mainly with adults. I used to work a lot I work with teens as well, but the young children, I don't work that much. I used to, but I'm more attracted to the teens and the people that understand a little bit more. What I'm seeing today is, like I said, there is coming in today, can be OTDs, but they can come with the full garb. It's today it doesn't matter anymore. It's But you see the rebellion because the parents said you have to do because I said so. You have to do. You're gonna get punished, and that's not. The Reched Archenoim, it says, Hashem says, I gave the Torah with sweetness, with honey. If you deliver it with honey, it's something that. But if parents think that the yeshiva system is going to do the whole thing, that is an issue, and they're also giving authority for the yeshivas to do that. It wasn't that way 20, 30 years ago. It's
Right.
changing. And what I'm saying is that when I have an adult coming into me, I tell them, you know what, forget everything that you learned to yeshiva. Let's start all over again. I tell it to them, when you go to make a driver's license, you did a permit, and you did a road test. And the road test, if you passed, great, you passed. You're not the greatest driver after you walk away from that road test, even though you're still afraid to drive on the highway, you still have to fret. But they're seeing that, you know what, you're a responsible person. I'm allowing you to have a license, and you're going to be okay. If somebody, didn't do the rules, okay, then you have to do the road test again. I would say the yeshiva system is the same thing. It's basically they're giving you the certain rules, but you really have to choose for yourself. It's also not about your parents. It's about, yeah, they gave you whatever the best they can, and yeah, but parents do have to deliver with love, with connection. Connection is the number one, with which, and we see that in Kabbalah, we see that in Chassidus, we see this in all over Torah, that this is, and such a, I think this is a part which is, it has to be, we have to put out flags with this, that they should be aware of that. That's, this is what we're seeing in the therapy room, what's missing.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned to me you're working the modalities, CBT, DBT, IFS. How do you know? What do you choose? When? What? What do you take out from your toolbox? Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So if I could just, before I answer that, I want to get back to what you were just saying about the parents and the importance of parenting. I heard an incredible example that I use all the time is, everybody's so connected with our phones these days. And I heard parenting is so much like your phone, meaning that, on a good day, if you're lucky, you walk out of your house, your phone's at 100%. And as you go through your day, you use it for emails, it goes down 5-10%. You make some phone calls, it goes down another 10%. You use it for, watching a video here and there, social media, WhatsApp. By the time you get home, if you're lucky, your phone's at 30%, right? And then you walk in and you get to plug it back in, and hopefully by the next day it's at 100% again. And parenting is the exact same way, is that what we want our kids to feel that when they're at home, they're at 100%. They know that they have the support and the love up till 100% if we're lucky. Now, unfortunately, between you and me, kids are never at 100% with that. They're going through their own process of growth. Let's say they leave at 100%. As they're walking out, they're running late. They didn't get a chance to eat supper, breakfast. They're down 10%. They get on the bus and somebody says a nasty comment to them. They go down another 10%. They don't get to play by recess. They go down 20%. Then they get a mark that they're not happy with. And by the time they get home, they're at 30%. And what we need to be is that sense of support. Because if we don't have that charger, if we're not the charger for them as that phone, then the next day when they're leaving the house, they start out at 30%. And what happens when you start out with your phone at 30% to start the day? I mean, forget about it. We're not lasting half the day. So I
That's
thought it's a really great
very well
analogy.
said. Very well said. Meaning to say, parents on the charge, they really need to be 150%
Oh, 100%. Yes. 100%.
in order to give the power over to children. And you know what? They really should think about it during the day. That goes through, you know, they have a job. People don't realize, that the chinuch starts, you know, right in the beginning. Some say even the 9 months before. But again, you have to be grounded. You have to be healthy. You have to make sure you're taking care of yourself.
Our kids are learning so much more from what we're doing than from what we're telling them. The way we act in mornings when they see us, and if we're crazy stressed, if we're crazy anxious, that plays such a huge role on how they walk out of the house just to start the day already.
Right, right, right,
So to go back to what you were asking, so
right.
I think when I use modalities, so I definitely there's a huge mixture I'll use. I'll use CBT. I would say CBT, DBT, IFS is definitely evidence-based therapy, and it's very it's I feel like people really like it because it gives you something to really hold on to that you can then utilize and walk out of the room with, as opposed to, let's say, psychodynamic, psychoanalytic, where you're sitting in the room really just doing a lot of talking. And you could walk out, especially in private practice, people tend to feel like, I want to feel like I'm making progress, and I want them to feel that way as well. So I would say, it depends on specifically what they're coming into the room with. If you're coming into the room with anxiety, it's definitely a lot of CBT, DBT, really utilizing, understanding our thoughts, our behaviors, being able to add new thoughts to that, being able to separate different facets, to be able to see things from a broader lens. And then I really love tying IFS in because, IFS at its core, it really explains that all parts are good parts. And I think if we can learn to understand, I can't tell you how many times when I ask somebody, is anxiety a good thing or a bad thing? Automatically they say it's bad. And anxiety is not a bad thing. Anxiety, when it's heightened, can be bad. It's really how we respond that becomes bad when we try to fight the anxiety and sort of make it balloon out of control. But if we look at anxiety off the bat and understand that it's really a part of us that's protecting us and trying to help us, it allows us to then understand what it's protecting us from and then move forward and be able to accomplish whatever's being thrown at us. So again, I don't have an answer necessarily. Oh, I use this, I use that. I mean, obviously, when it comes to anxiety, OCD, I will gear toward CBT, DBT. But I would say it really depends on each person in the room. It depends on the session that they're coming in with, what they're presenting. I always say I don't treat diagnosis. I treat a person. I'm treating what you're bringing up in the room, right? If you smoke and you tell me I don't want to quit smoking, so that's not a problem I'm going to focus on, because no matter how badly I would think it may be bad and I want you to stop, you're not going to stop if you don't want to. So I'm really working on the problem that you have in the room, the thing that you're bringing up that you say is an issue. That's what we're going to tackle. That's what we're going to focus on.
Do you find that these modalities help for OCD?
Absolutely. I've worked with clients who I had a client who was in his room all day, not doing well, and then after a year, he was spending a year in Eretz Yisrael. I definitely have seen a lot of different clients where, Baruch Hashem, I've worked with religious OCD where clients were not able to use a certain car to date because of Tuma or, different things. And Baruch Hashem, they went on to function and overcome those anxieties. I've worked with clients who were overly using, showering for hours, overusing wipes, where they drastically cut it down and it was really impeding in their day-to-day functioning, and their life drastically improved. Absolutely.
How does the ERS exposure therapy come in? Is that
So
under
I
the
don't use, I'm not trained in ERS. I would say with CBT, there's definitely exposure. So I use exposure, but I wouldn't call it ERS just because I didn't train in ERS. But
Hmm.
I do a lot of exposure. I like to do a SUD scale. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
No, tell me about that.
So the SUD scale is basically if somebody has anxiety, often it's usually there's a core issue, let's say religious OCD, or it's usually, let's say, it'll usually, I would say when somebody's struggling with severe OCD or anxiety, it's usually like they're usually a bulk of different things that trigger, but they all can stem from the same thing. So what I like to do is I'll write a scale of 100 to 0. So I'll do 100, 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. And then I'll go through all the different things that trigger the anxiety with the client, and we'll put it into that scale from 0 to 100. So if something, let's say, I do a lot of exposure in the room with anxiety where we'll sit there and we'll say, okay, like if we're discussing something, or we'll go back to a moment and we'll check in with the anxiety levels in the moment and try to navigate it. And then outside the room, also being able to really become more aware of the level of anxiety that it brings, and then noticing that going through whatever you're going through, and then where the anxiety is afterward. So when we do the SUD scale, you're going to have a list of 0 to 100 where you're going to write all the different levels of anxiety that you feel. So let's say somebody who doesn't like to go outside, right? He gets in social anxiety, communicating with others. So I'll say, okay, let's say going to the store and picking up an order. So I'll put that at a 30. All right, going to the store and ordering actually at the store, that's a 60. Going into a store and doing the whole shopping, that's 40. So like we'll make a list of all of it. And then what you want to do is you want to tackle not a 10 and not 100, but you want to find something in the middle that they're able to tackle. So you say this week we're going to practice exposure, where what you're going to do is you're going to go out and, let's say, go to the store, place an order. And what I want you to do is before you walk into the store, I want you to check your level of anxiety. Say on a scale from 1 to 10, how anxious are you? And then typically what we end up doing is we run away because of that. So we create this false narrative that the answer to my problems is to avoid or to escape. And what happens is as soon as we avoid or escape, the anxiety goes from wherever it's at drastically down. So in our mind, we say, okay, I found the fix. But really, you're putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound because you're not solving the issue, because anytime you're ever going to have to leave the house, anxiety is going to go through the roof. So with exposure, what we do is we allow ourselves to hit the panic peak. By hitting the panic peak, naturally, anxiety begins to coast down. And what we're trying to do with the client is through exposure is allow them to understand what level of anxiety they're at, and then to go through that exposure exercise. And obviously it's something that they're okay with and they're ready to tackle. And then to notice how after going through the exercise, checking in with the anxiety and noticing how without the avoidance, without the escape, naturally that anxiety is coasting down. But another very important piece with that exercise is also when you're preparing and choosing whatever whatever exposure you're going to tackle for the week, you want to really walk through it with the person and say, okay, what is the likelihood of you actually following through on it? What would come up? And if something were to come up to get in the way with it, how would you then deal with it? What would you then, right, to really prep the client. So obviously, if you could do exposure in the room, it's always the best because the exposure in the room gives you the ability to help them navigate it and notice it. And then allow them to do that with giving them, I would say, grounding exercises and breathing exercises so that when the anxiety is heightened, they feel like they can gain a sense of control to go and perform the exposure exercise.
How would you use it on religious OCD? Let's say the client tells you, uh, I don't know, I'm learning all day. I can't even help my mother. I have to learn. Okay. But day at night, I don't want to go on vacation. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. What do you do with that part? I mean, this exposure won't help over here.
Why would it not help?
How would you do that? How would you do exposure here?
Well, again, first off, it's never healthy. Excessive amounts of anything is never healthy. And you can go to any Rebbe or Rav, and they're going to say that if somebody is, delving into learning 24/7 and it's affecting their functioning, they're going to say not to do it that much, right? So again, I want to just take a step back.
So saying taking him to a Rebbe, that the Rebbe should tell him that he's going to listen to.
So what I want to take a step back.
The therapist won't listen to on that.
So that's where I want to take a step back. I want to clarify one thing is that I'm not creating goals for the client. The client's creating their goals. Meaning, if a client comes into me and says, I don't have a problem, I want to learn all day. So we're not tackling that.
Yeah, but
because
when it's a teen or when it's a child and the
even a
parents
teen,
are not.
even a teen, because again, when you're working with a teen, you could tell him all you want, he's not going to do it. But if again, I'm going to work with the client, I'm going to say, so again, do you think that there are points where you are excessively learning? Do you think that maybe it's important for you to take some breaks? Again, I'm definitely going to work on getting buy-in with the client. I mean, if it's that excessive, the client being in the room is going to be irritated, right? I mean, he's wasting time from learning. He's spending 45 minutes plus the travel time to come into my
Right.
room. So again, I'm working with a client who wants to be in the room. Ideally, you want to, when you're doing exposure exercises, you need the buy-in from the client. So I would say I'm not addressing the exposure until I have a sense of buy-in from the client.
Would you use MI as well in a case like this?
What's MI?
MI, motivational interviewing, helping the
Oh,
client.
yeah, absolutely. Again, so I'll mix that in. I'll mix in, again, I've trained in Somatic. I've trained in, I work with couples sometimes. I'll use Gottman's method. I'll use, Theraplay, Sandtray, CPT, ACT. I'll use a lot of different things, but definitely, Gestalt, the here and now in the room. I don't know if you've ever used the empty chair method where, let's say a client with a parent or a client with a spouse where they really want to say something, really
Right.
working through those emotions and being able to connect with them. It's incredible work. I love doing inner child work as well. That it's sort of like IFS, but bypassing the protectors. So it can work for some people. Some people it might not work. But like I've worked with clients where they don't show any emotion, and then doing inner child work, they're sitting there bawling, they're sitting there crying, not being able to explain that either. You know what I mean?
How do you find when a client doesn't have a sense of self, does IFS work?
So I mean, again, if a guy can't connect with the parts, it's not going to work. I think that there's two different parts of IFS, ironically parts, but I think that there's the IFS at the concept, right, which is at the core, which I love to do is I like to draw a diagram where I'll draw the sun and then I'll have three clouds, and the sun would be, let's say, if we're talking about you, I'll write Mendy in the sun, and then I'll write the three clouds. I'll write, let's say, anxiety, stress, and anger, and then you're able to have like the sun shining through in between the clouds. And we'll talk about it, that these anxiety, stress, anger, these are things that are here to help you, right? And we'll discuss it. How is it here to help you, right? How is anger here to help you? Well, it's telling you that you're feeling threatened, right? If you're feeling threatened, so anger is coming in to protect you so that nobody can take advantage of you. What's anxiety? Anxiety is it's when we're uncomfortable with the uncertainty, right? We're feeling uncomfortable with uncertainty, and anxiety tells us, hey, you're about to go through something, we don't know what's going to happen. Great. If we don't have anxiety, we wouldn't be able to prepare for that moment. Stress is the same thing. It means that we're overworking. Without stress, we don't realize that our body's overworking. So all these things are good parts. Now, it's all great. It's protecting us. It's here to help us. The issue is when anxiety comes in and says, I can't allow Mendy to make a decision because he's going to make the wrong decision. And all of a sudden, anxiety takes in and overcomes, and that's when anxiety stops you from being able to do things. Now, these protectors have two different types of protectors, right? There's a manager and there's a firefighter. The manager is the one where it's going to say, you know what, Mendy, just if you don't go out, if you don't go and talk to people, if you don't go to shul, you don't have anxiety anymore because you don't have to interact with people. That's one type of it, which is not great because, again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that if I don't go out, I avoid, I escape, and then my anxiety is reduced. And then I start believing that that's the answer, and I stop going to minyanim. Eventually, I fall out of a job. I won't be able to pay my rent, and I get into this really negative loop, regardless of a sense of self or not, right? And then the firefighter, right? I always say is the firefighter. What's the one job of a firefighter, Mendy?
Put it out.
Put out the fire. If you ever go into a house after a fire, they rip out the ceilings, they break the windows, they destroy everything. The doors are ripped open. Just one goal, put out the fire. And that's exactly what the anxiety, the stress, the anger. Think about anger, right? You're gonna just blow up and destroy relationships because I'm feeling uncomfortable right now. And the protector is saying, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. So you'll scream at people, you'll get fired from your jobs, you'll go, your kids will stop talking to you. People, it could lead to divorce, where people are just, let me put out this fire and not think about the results that come from what I'm doing. So again, in the moment, it solves the current issue, but in the big picture, it doesn't resolve any real true issues because now I'm left all alone and I'm still not feeling like secure. So again, I think teaching people IFS at its core, I don't know if you necessarily need that sense of self. I think it could actually help you with a sense of self. It could help you understand yourself. I can't tell you how many times I've said to a client, a client will come in and say, I have ADHD, I have anxiety, OCD, and I'll say, what's anxiety? And they'll say, I don't know, it's stress. And I'll say, no, that's stress. Anxiety is not stress, right? And if we don't understand what we're experiencing, if we don't understand what we're going through, how are we able to go and deal with it and solve it?
Right. Where does medication come in, or when?
So I will definitely say, I work a lot with psychiatrists. It really depends on each person and what the issue is. I think with ADHD, you can go to medication a lot quicker because ADHD medication doesn't have any long-term effects. It really, you take it, it works. You don't take it, it doesn't. It's incredible. And for some people, if you're, the way I look at it is there's a chemical imbalance in the brain. So if we can give somebody the ability to be at baseline, people are like, oh, why would I take medication? It's cheating. It's giving me this edge. You're not having an edge. You're having the baseline. You're finally going to be able to fit in and be able to do things. When it comes to ADHD, I would say, there's two types of ADHD, right? There's three types. Well, there's the hyperactive. There's the what's it called? This I'm forgetting the term, but basically where you're spaz, you're not focused, the lack of focus, and then there's a mix. So I would say with kids, if a kid's just spazzed, if a kid is just, like not remembering things, I wouldn't necessarily throw medication at them. I would say medication would be more for if it's getting in the way of their functioning, if they're, in school and they're not getting along with other kids because they're super, hyperactive, if they're not being able to get things done and learn things, that's where I would bring in medication. So I guess the answer to that would be really if it's getting in the way of your day-to-day functioning and you're putting in the work with therapy and it's not working. So again, I would say always going for a evaluation with a psychiatrist. It doesn't mean you're going to start taking medication. But again, if it's getting in the way of your day-to-day functioning, you're trying therapy, that's not working, you're not able to retain the skills you're learning, then medication should be brought up.
And that should be by OCD as well, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, a lot of times you won't be able to do the work in therapy without the medication.
And how much time would you give it for a client, I mean, to evaluate that?
So I'm not the one who's pushing medication most of the time. I want them to bring it up. Again, I could say maybe you could talk to a psychiatrist, but I'm not the psychiatrist here. I'm the therapist. So medication could be a great option. I'm not going to tell you to. Meaning, again, I'll bring up the concept, but I don't tell anybody what to do. That's the beauty of my job. I don't tell you what to do. I can give you different things to see, different ideas, and then you're the one who makes the decisions. I always tell my clients in the first session, I have the easy job here because you're the one who's going to have to put the work in, and you're the one who's going to have to see, really put in the work to see the results.
What would you say in general about somebody suffering from OCD?
Mm-hmm.
When should they see, after how many months or time frame should they see some sort of change?
Few weeks. Again, some sort
Within a
of
week?
change. Absolutely. So again, are they on medication or they're not on medication?
Not on medication.
Not on medication. So again, I would say is if you're if you're coming to a therapist and your goals are to create change, your goals are to put in the work, your goals are to really put in the work. You're motivated to see the change. You're ready to put in the work, and you're trying to put in the exposure exercise. You're trying to do whatever you're discussing in the room. And again, there's something that's just stumping you. So then I would say after if you're truly trying and you're noticing that nothing's coming up, I would say to start on a low dose of medication after a month or so or 2 months. I would say, yeah. I mean, if you see it's the importance is the collaboration between the therapist and the psychiatrist, right? If you're taking a really low dose of medication and you're seeing that now you're able to do the exposure exercises, you're seeing a change, great. Again, if you're seeing changes without the medication, even better. Usually when somebody's coming in with OCD, it's not a small thing. It's usually they're getting in the way of the day-to-day functioning, and most people don't come to therapy when an issue starts. They come when it's become this big ordeal that now,
Right.
yeah,
It
getting
blew up in their face or something like that.
exactly.
Wow. Can you tell us some stories of actual just things that you've seen in your practice and specific to OCD, especially to the religious OCD, and in what specific age that well it was a breakthrough and
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm thinking of somebody specific right now. In his, I would say, 50s, came in. He was really struggling to. It was more. It wasn't religious. It was more of his appearance. So again, I would say everything really connects. So he was focused on exercising excessively. He would go on the scale every single morning, trying to get to a certain number. So when it came to the Chagim, he would get extremely stressed out. When he would go on vacations, he would get extremely stressed out because he knew that his wife would want to go out to eat every time. If he noticed the scale, the weight would go up a little, he would then cut out lunch, cut out supper. It was so intense that he would in the mornings he would, let's say, have a bowl of bran flakes, and he would take out some of the bran flakes. And I would say to him all the time is, you're talking about 10 calories or 8 calories. It's bran flakes. This is not this isn't going to make or break your weight. But it was incredible to see how he went from, he was so hyper focused in everything with his appearance, and it was really getting in the way of his relationships. It was getting in the way of his relationships with his grandchildren, his kids, his wife, and he really worked on not going on the scale as much. And he would bring up to me and say, I don't understand. I know so many people who go on the scale all the time and they're living regular lives. And I said, yeah, because to them it's not an obsession, right? What happens, right? What is OCD? OCD is there's an obsession, right? So let's say his figure, his weight, the way he looks. So then what happens is there's the obsession, and then he gets anxiety. So he notices, oh, I might be gaining weight, something might be going wrong, I get anxious. And that leads to a compulsive act that we do that reduces the anxiety and allows the person to function. So what we want to do is, I always tell people with OCD, I'm not here to get rid of your OCD. I'm not. I will not fix your OCD. But what I will do is I'll help you reduce it and gain control over the OCD. Right? We don't get rid of the obsessions, we get rid of compulsions. That allows the obsessions to not control your life. So again, when you're working with OCD, I've seen drastic changes where, people, again, like I said earlier, this person who he wasn't leaving his room, he was suicidal, he was struggling with intense intrusive thoughts due to OCD, and we worked on exposure, we worked on pushing himself to go out there and challenge those obsessive thoughts, and it got him to really build a stronger sense of self, be able to socialize more, because he had a stronger sense of self and he wasn't in his head. He was able to be more in the present moment. And that again also leads to the grounding exercises and the breathing. What happens with anxiety, OCD, is we go from the here and now, we go from reality, and we end up in our heads. We end up stuck in our thoughts. So my goal as a therapist, my goal is to really work on noticing how, noticing thoughts versus facts, noticing when we're in our head, and then being able to regain control and bring ourselves down to the here and now, and really give ourselves the ability to take control over the anxiety. And I always say, don't allow the anxiety to control you, but instead allow yourself to control the anxiety.
that's beautiful. And how much, like you say, with this client, you mentioned that as far as his appearance, how much time did you work with him in order for him to be balanced?
So with a client like that, I was working with him for about a year, maybe even more. And again, we were tackling different areas, different aspects. But I brought up to him again is that it really depends on the client where I brought up like, okay, we tackled this area. And then again, there were other areas that we were focusing on as well. So I would say after a few months, there was, even 2, 3 months, there was a drastic change. And like, I'll tell you, this guy, when he was in and out of different therapists before he ended up with me for, a year plus, and he said he was seeing results. He was seeing his life improve, whereas with other therapists, not necessarily did he see that result. So he moved on to the next therapist. So again, I would say it really comes down to when I terminated with him, I told him, I said, is your life perfect? No. But I think that you're at a place where you have the skills and tools to take control over the anxiety and to be able to, when something comes up, you're able to navigate it better so that you can conquer the OCD and not allow it to conquer you.
And this person that is, when did he start going to therapy? Somebody's 50 years old. When did it hit him? Or what
So,
age?
so again, he's been in and out of therapy at younger ages. I would say anxiety, the OCD really got really bad when he married off his last kid. And then he was home and he had a lot of more free time and he got stuck in his head and he was spending time, dealing with specific things that then it became much more apparent and overtook his life.
And what would you say is the basis of someone, his appearance, like some of the guys 50 years old? What's really triggering him to that point? What's
So it could depend. I think with him, something in his childhood when he was like 15 years old, he was overweight. It went through something, and again, it
Mhm.
can start with the regular anxiety, and then it can balloon.
And getting back to the religious type of OCD, what do you think where does that come from? Is that something they pick up in the yeshiva? Is that something from the parents, or something that where does it normally what do you say that they pick something up, especially in the religious anxiety?
So I wouldn't say it's necessarily one place or the other. I think that there is a genetic aspect to it. When it comes to OCD, there
Correct,
can be a genetic aspect.
correct.
It can be at home, right? We were talking about earlier how if parents are super anxious and putting a lot of pressure on a kid, it can definitely spill over. Especially, I would say if they have a very obsessive personality, right? I think we all have obsessions in our lives, right? We
Sure.
all have our little things that we do, right? I mean, if we grew up back in the day, parents would walk around, make sure all the lights were shut off. Those are obsessions, right? I mean, how much electric is it truly saving by shutting all those lights when you leave the house each time? I mean, I heard that even turning on and shutting off the lights uses more electric than when it's just on. I mean, there's definitely obsessions, but I think we all have different obsessions and different ways we like things. But at the end of the day, it doesn't get in the way of our day-to-day functioning. So it definitely, there are things you can notice earlier on when you see somebody, doing things where, let's say, a kid who has to have his bed made perfectly neat and that, it's getting in the way of their day. Like the way I would say is what happens if you don't do it, right? So let's say kids like to have their beds neat and they'll spend an extra 5 minutes in the morning on the bed. Okay, but what happens when they don't get to do that, right? What happens if one day they're running late? They weren't able to make their bed. Or what happens if a kid wasn't able to say the brachas in the morning with kavana? So now he had to rush through it. Does that then destroy his entire day and in Chayder, he's not able to function, he's just not doing well? Or is it that he's able to still go about his day? So I would say that's where it goes from obsession to to OCD. Right? I always say there's OCD, there's the obsession, then there's the compulsion, which is the things that we're doing to reduce the obsession. And what makes it a disorder is when it gets in the way of the day-to-day functioning.
Yeah, they're functional. Correct. Wow. What would you say to shout out to people or parents or something that from the rooftops? What would you tell them? What probably you have messages that you've seen in your room and what's happening in the communities. What would you say or shout out to them or
So,
helpful tips for them what to do?
yeah, so one thing that parents might not like is that you guys got to work. I always tell a regular client, like an adult client or a teenage client, that the hardest working person in the room has to be you. If the therapist is the hardest working person in the room, we have a problem. I'll say it with kids. Unfortunately, it's the parent that has to be the hardest working person, not the kid. Meaning, at the end of the day, a therapist is with the kid for under an hour a week. At the end of the day, where the real work happens, I always say therapy is 1 hour a week, but in reality, the work happens. There's 168 hours a week, right? So 167 hours are outside of therapy. That's where the real work happens. And that falls on parents. Sometimes parents want to just drop off your kid and say, fix my kid, fix the problem. It really comes down to, we need to be working together. This is where you'll see results, is when everybody's working together. And we're, at the end of the day, it really falls on the parents more than the therapist. That's the first one. The second one is, don't minimize your kids' feelings. So often, when a kid's dealing with something, a parent's going to tell them it's not a big deal. And what you're doing when you tell a kid it's not a big deal, you're telling them, don't believe your feelings. Stop trusting your emotions. So what we want to do, and I love giving this example, I think this is such an important example when it comes to relating to clients with therapy, parenting, rebbeim, everybody in life, is if you want buy-in with somebody, you need to, the way I like to use the example is, Mendy, what happens when your car is skidding on the road? How do you get out of a skid?
You go the opposite side.
No, so you turn into the skid.
Into the
Because
skin.
if you turn the opposite side, your wheels are never going to catch on. So when you turn your wheels to the skid, and your car is skidding now, so the wheels then catch on, and then you can turn away from the skid afterward. So I love saying that with kids, with parenting, with rebbeim, with relationships. No matter what, when we're communicating with somebody else, what we want to do to be able to get buy-in from the other person is turn into the skid. Instead of just telling the person what you're saying, help them know that you're understanding them. So when a kid says, I'm feeling this and that, first validate so that you go into the skid and then turn away from the skid. That would be my advice.
Validation is extremely important. Do you realize sometimes that, as you mentioned, in kids or teens, that they're coming to therapy, but sometimes the parents need the therapy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I say all the time when I talk to supervisees, when I work with kids myself, I always tell the parents, minimum once a month you got to do collateral sessions, because again, so often, as you're saying, it's again, I don't think it doesn't mean the parent's a bad person. I think I
Nobody's
always
bad.
tell my parents,
There's no
no,
bad part, we said.
right,
Nobody's. It's a
exactly.
matter of, we just have to correct.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the parents sometimes they get defensive. They're like, I'm working so hard, I'm raising a family of however many kids, I'm doing all this. It's not me. And I think that just, yeah, it's not your fault. You're not a bad person. Sometimes, as you said earlier, right? If I always say, if there was the right way to parent, there would be one best-selling book, How to Parent Your Kids. Everybody would buy it, and that's it. But exactly that, you have parents say, I don't get it. So many times I've worked with my other kids. Why is it not working with them? And the answer is because he's not your other kids. You got lucky. You got away with the fact that you were able to do it for 3 kids in a row. This one's not, and this is reality.
I would
And
say that each kid is a different book also.
exactly. That's exactly right. And I think that that's the bottom line. The bottom line is, parents have to really be. That goes back to the first part that I was saying, is the parent has to be the hardest working person, because we can only do so much in the room.
Now, you mentioned also somatic. Can you tell us a little bit about the somatic exercises? You do it in the room, you give them homework. What do you give them? What do
Absolutely.
you tell them?
Absolutely. So again, somatic is really, becoming more in touch with yourself, becoming more in touch with the body. Again, I'm not, as I told you, I use the other modalities more, but I love doing the breathing exercises, utilize, which is also DB. I always joke, I say, I feel like all modalities are really the same thing, just labeled differently. I say, if you want to become a big presenter, take any modality, relabel it, take all the stuff and just sell it as your own. Because I feel like they really do intertwine so much. For example, DBT, we talk about the five senses, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I feel like that's so much somatic, right? Noticing what you see, what you hear, what you feel, really just utilizing your five senses, noticing your breathing in the room, noticing what you're seeing in the room, really grounding yourself, bringing yourself down. It really, I would say, it spins off of DBT and somatic work. So I'll just say quickly, one of the things I love to do is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is, or I don't even necessarily do that. I'll just say is, start listing, look at something in the room that's not moving, right? So find something in the room that's not moving, something that's not stressing you out, obviously. And then listen to 3 things that you hear. So, or just shout out whatever you're hearing right now. So it could be the fan in the room, the air conditioning, people talking outside, just random things you hear. Then notice different things that you see. So you could look around the room. Also notice things you feel. I love doing this without touching physically, but rather things that you feel. So let's say noticing your yarmulke on your head or your glasses, right? Mendy, if I tell you now to notice the glasses around your ears, do you notice it now?
I notice I'm in this.
I
This is what
know,
I do all
but
day.
yeah, but I'm saying as we're going through the conversation, Mendy, are you
Right,
noticing it while we're talking? No, because we don't notice it,
right. Because when you're in
right?
your brain, you're in your brain. When you're in your body, you're in your body. But we
And
don't realize how
ironically,
much the body has, so much information that will help your
exactly.
brain focus.
Right. And ironically, I think a lot of anxiety is when we become too close with our feelings, right? So let's say when people are hypochondriac, when you start focusing on I always say we're not a well-oiled machine. Human beings are far from perfect. And I mean, we're perfect to tell them like him and we're perfect as we are, but we're not just a regulated machine. We have things that go wrong. And when we hyper focus on them and we constantly focus, we're going to notice everything that's wrong. So, and that's where a hypochondriac come in and people with, running to doctors and running to, find things, which between you and me, again, is that escape, that avoidance where you go to the doctor tells you everything's fine, and you feel better for a second instead of practicing the exposure, not going to the doctor, where then, again, it allows you to realize, hey, I'm not dying naturally, and then not have to run to doctors every 2 weeks.
Yeah, I always tell clients what you said before that, but like you mentioned, anxiety is not a bad thing. So I tell them anxiety is your friend, it's not your enemy. And that's something
Yeah,
which they have to know that because they think, oh no, 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 it's not your enemy.
yeah,
Yeah. The reason also why I asked you, because I had therapists that and I understood it when I spoke to other therapists that mentioned to me that when they find somebody having a hard time finding their sense of self, there's it's very difficult to work with them on IFS. And I had therapists that I worked together with them in unison with the client, which I do my somatic work with them. And then I sent them back and said, "Whoa, what a difference! Now the sense of self is there. You could work on that IFS because sometimes it's like talking to a wall. So what are we trying to do if there's no sense of self? And that's a strictly body work. It's strictly once you work in the body, and then you can. I've seen that. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful.
I would say a sense of self tied in with the vulnerability concept, right? I think so many people struggle to allow themselves to be vulnerable in the room. So if you can't allow yourself to be vulnerable, IFS at its like the real IFS, which is connecting to the part, noticing it, you're not going to be able to do that if you can't allow yourself to be vulnerable.
Right, 100%. That's a beautiful model, and it's
Yeah.
something. It's very spiritual in a way. It's very
Yeah.
very spiritual.
I'll just say one more example that you said, religious OCD, or I had a client who he struggled to go up for the Yamid, to go down, not to the Yamid, to get an Aliyah. And he happened to have been a Kayan. So going up for an Aliyah as a Kayan, you're getting called up all the time. So again, he would escape, he would avoid. And we used IFS, the concept, and he sort of like, how people like imagine the angel and the devil on your shoulders. So he called this little anxiety piece, he called it a nudnik. And it was so cool to be able to separate the nudnik from him. And we broke it down to saying, the nudnik was like, hey, buddy, don't go up because you're going to embarrass yourself. So we had him like talk to the nudnik and say, hey, I get why you're here to help me. I get you don't want me to embarrass myself. Thank you. And I want you here. I want you there to help me, but don't overtake me. And he was able to conquer that and go up. The example that I love to give is when you're walking down the street as a 5-year-old with a parent, right? And
Mhm.
your parent grabs your hand. What happens? You feel comfort. You go on, you move on, and you cross the street, right? Now, Mendy, let's say you, as today, you're walking down the street with your father, and as you get to the red light, your father grabs your hand. What's your reaction going to be?
Hmm. Meaning as an adult.
As an adult today, say
Yeah,
you walk down the street with your mother, your father, and they grab your hand. What's your reaction going to be like?
might be shame
Shame, right? But what's underlying the shame?
that I can do it myself, meaning
There
I'm
we go. Bingo.
self-sufficient.
Exactly. So if you dig down, it's saying, hey, I got this. I can do it myself. So I always ask the client, does that mean that you don't want to have anything to do with your father, that you want him out of your life? No. You're saying, trust me, I got this. I want to walk with you. I want to continue going with you, but I want you by my side, but I also want you to trust me that I can do it on my own. The issue is that with our anxiety, with our feelings, we don't look at it like our father. We say, get out of my life when it shows up and tries to help you. What we really want to do is we want to build that relationship with a parent, like with a parent, where we could tell the part, hey, I'm not 8 years old anymore. I don't need you to protect me the way I needed you as an 8-year-old when I was crossing the street.
I like this parable very much. Very nice. I might use it.
Please do.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful, Ellie. So if people want to contact you, where's the best place to contact you? I guess we'll also put it on the bottom of the video. But
Yes.
if
So I'll just tell you quickly, what I do now is, so I have a private practice in Lakewood. My email is Eli Weinreb, LCSW at Gmail. And my cell phone is 914-458-2323. I guess you could put it on the bottom. I also have a WhatsApp group called Positively Psyched, where I post daily positivity on that. And then I'm working as the director of Tulip in Brooklyn. I supervise not the director, I'm sorry, the director of supervision and training at Tulip, which I'm supervising other therapists there and helping with that as well.
beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for your time and keep up your good work and your good vibes. That's so important. When you give out a good vibe to clients, people think you can have a license, you can be everything, but if you don't have that vibe and that open heart, the relationship is most of the therapy in the room, and that's what I'm seeing by you, which is very inspirational. And yeah, keep up that good work and helping the communities. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.